Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to give you a recommendation for an art exhibit that I think is worth seeing. Judy and I saw it a couple of weeks ago, and we'll certainly be going again. This is an exhibit called Winter Count that's at the National Gallery of Canada. And I don't know if you follow the National Gallery of Canada, but they've been through quite a bit of turmoil over the past few years. It started out as a well-intended thing called decolonization, where they would reduce their emphasis on European art and Canadian art and the European tradition and include more indigenous art and art from other cultures in there, which is a good idea. And under the former director, Mark Mayer, who was there until 2019, it seemed to be implemented very well. But under the two short-term directors they had since Mark Mayer retired, it got very extreme. And a lot of senior people were fired, including the chief curator. The union that represents the employees wrote a letter to the minister demanding an inquiry because of the state of morale at the museum. And fortunately, things have started to turn around. And 2 years ago, they hired a new director called Jean-Francois Belle-Île, and he seems to be doing a good job, and this is the first major show that they've had since he took over. And he's also a good writer as well as a good administrator, and he wrote an introduction to the show in the catalog for the show, which is here, and he can explain what this show is about better than I can, so I'm going to read a few little excerpts from Mr. Belle-Île. Across the north, winter is the first common language spoken through snowdrifts, ice roads, and low winter suns. It shapes bodies, homes, memories, and artworks across the snowbound landscapes of Canada and Northern Europe. It demands fluency in endurance and creativity. It has forged cultures of resilience, quiet adaptation, and imagination, as reflected in the works of generations of artists. Winter Count came together as a collaborative project among three curatorial departments: Canadian art, European art, and Indigenous ways. It reflects the gallery's desire to weave together multiple art histories around a theme that has become extremely impactful in Canada: winter. The exhibition's title, Winter Count, refers to a Lakota tradition. Lakota are Indigenous people in Saskatchewan. Their tradition of visually recording each year's most significant events onto animal hides or cloth. And over years, the Winter Count served not just as a record of survival, but as a form of storytelling, memory, and cultural community that resonate through this exhibition. Faced with new elements of the season, communities adapt, and shared challenges become the foundations of lasting bonds. There's no other way to survive. Artists across continents have borrowed from each other's palettes, compositions, and themes. Scandinavian painters engaged with winter's challenges in ways that mirrored Canadian contemporaries, and Indigenous artists today continue the tradition, integrating new materials and technologies into ancient narratives. Winter was and remains an equalizer. It flattened distinctions, making the wealthy as vulnerable as the poor, the newcomer as cautious as the old-timer. Winter Count invites viewers to imagine a future shaped by the lessons of winter: cooperation, resilience, and mutual respect. Winter will never stop being our first common language, a tongue of resilience, imagination, and kinship. Through the artworks of this exhibition, we glimpse a future that's brighter, stronger, and more interconnected. A future where we continue to speak fluently across time and place, bound by winter's enduring vocabulary. This is the story Winter Count tells, a story of survival, yes, but also of joy, invention, and quiet triumph of finding one another across the snow. And it's much longer than that, but that's enough for now. And there's 150 works in this exhibit, but I've selected just a few to give you a taste of what it's about. And unfortunately, I copied these from the calendar, so some of them are a bit distorted and not complete. But if you go to see the exhibit, you'll see them in their full glory. So can we go to the next one here? Okay. Now this is a work by Dwayne Linklater, who is an indigenous artist from Moose Factory. He now lives in North Bay. And this illustrates the winter count. Each one of those things is a stitch in a teepee cover, and there's information encoded on all these things, and when the first snowfall came, how long they lasted, how many snowfalls there were. So each line is a record of the winter, their story of survival through the winter. And it's remarkably like the way we store information now on computers, where each bit of information is valuable, the same way each stitch was on the teepee cover. Okay, we could go to the next one. This is a piece by Lauren Harris that you may have seen before. It's called Icebergs Davis Strait, and it was done in 1930. And Lauren Harris was a member of the group of 7, and perhaps the most innovative member, as his work became more abstract as his career developed. But his abstractions weren't developed by something he thought of, but by what he saw in the Canadian landscape, the colors, the shapes and designs. And you can see how these icebergs, as they reflect light from their different surfaces, become almost like abstract art. Okay, the next one. This is a piece by Alex Colville, who's one of Canada's best-known artists, a realistic artist. This was done in 1974. And Alex Colville was a war artist, and then after the war, he spent most of his career working and teaching in the Maritimes, in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and painted all these hyper-realistic paintings that you see all over the place. This is one that's called Skater, and again, you can see how he uses the skater's pose and the body to create shapes and subtle colors in that too. That makes it kind of an iconic image of skating. So the next one. This one is a piece by Annie Putuguk. Annie Putuguk was an Inuit artist from Baffin Island, and she had some great success about 20 years ago. She had a show at the Power Plant Gallery in Toronto, which is a very important contemporary art gallery, and her career seemed to be taking off. And all of her work is in this style. They're all kind of pencil drawings of life in her community and encounters between the indigenous life of people and the culture of the South, in this case, Christmas, how Christmas influenced people on Baffin Island. And but Annie Putuguk fell on some hard times, and she wound up living on the street in Ottawa and selling her works on Rideau Street and in the Byward Market. And if you bought one of those things now, it might be worth somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000 because her works become very valuable. But in 2016, her body was discovered in the Rideau River, and the police were never able to determine whether she'd been murdered or whether this was a result of her own personal difficulties. But in 2021, the city of Ottawa decided to remember Annie Putuguk by naming a park after her, which is in Sandy Hill now. It's near the Sandy Hill Community Center on Somerset Street East. Okay, go on to the next one. This painting is by Jack Chambers. It's called Sunday Morning Number 2, and it shows winter the way a lot of us see it, which is through the windows of our houses. But London, Ontario was maybe the most important regional art center in Canada in the 60s and 70s. There were all kinds of artists living there. And Jack Chambers lived a middle-class life in his house up near the University of Western Ontario. And this painting was done in 1970, and there's a bit of wistfulness in this because a year earlier, Jack Chambers had been diagnosed with leukemia. And when his boys were 3 and 4 years old then, I think he knew that they were going to be without him in the not too distant future, and that's reflected in the painting. And he did unfortunately die at age 47. Okay, we'll go to the next one. This is done by an indigenous artist named Shirley Chichu, She was raised in northern Quebec and northern Ontario, and she's a multi-talented person who's been a playwright, a filmmaker, and an actor. And she was an actor in two series that CBC made about Indigenous people, The Res and Spirit Bay. But she was, you can see, she's also, most of her career was as a visual artist. And this one is called Cleaning Moose Hides. You can see by simplifying the design of the thing and intensifying the colors made it kind of an iconic piece about Indigenous life. So I recommend Winter Count. Go and see it. We'll certainly be going back to see it. And there's 150 paintings, including things by like Claude Monet and Camille Pissarro, famous French artists and that too, who also had their own experience of winter, which was somewhat similar to ours. Thank you.